A Song for Silas by Laurie Wick, Chapter 38. Amy put a silencing finger to her lips as her father looked from her to the stranger standing in the doorway leading from the living room. Silas's head was still bent over the basin. Paul watched his brother reach for a towel and vigorously rub his face and neck. Silas had just rehung the towel when out of the corner of his eye he caught sight of a fourth presence in the room. At the first sight of his younger brother, Silas only stared, and then a slow smile began to break across his face. An answering smile was stretching across Paul's, and within seconds the brothers were laughing and embracing, their words falling all over each other. "When did you get here? Your beard! Have you been home? Why didn't you write? You look great. So do you." The men stopped trying to communicate and simply looked at one another and laughed. Silas took Paul's arm and led him further into the room. "Grant, this is my brother Paul. Paul, this is Grant Nolan. And this," Silas's voice held pride, "is Amy. Have you met Amy?" "Oh, Si, you have got it bad," Paul thought as he studied the look on his brother's rapt face. "And I ought to know the signs." Paul reached across the table to shake Grant's hand. "It's good to meet you, Mr. Nolan. And yes, Silas, Amy and I have met." The two shared a smile, and Amy said, "How about some supper?" The four of them talked and shared news during the meal, and everyone left the table in good spirits. Silas held back and insisted on helping Amy with the dishes. "But Silas, you'll want to visit with your brother. He said he's leaving tomorrow." "You're right, I do want to visit with him, but I also want to hear you play, so I'm going to help you with these dishes so you can come out and entertain us." "Oh, Silas," Amy said, "I'm sure your brother doesn't want to hear me play. I'm sure he's heard countless piano players, and I sincerely doubt he wants to hear another." "Alas," Silas said, "I'll make a deal with you. My brother has always enjoyed hearing me play. If he asks me to play, then you're on. If he doesn't say a word, then I won't either." "Deal," Amy said, and by the smile on Silas's face, she knew she'd been had. Amy would have loved knowing the actual amount of seconds it took Paul to ask Silas to play. Surprisingly, Silas didn't tease her at all. "Well, Paul, I'd be only too glad to play, but you've never heard Amy play the piano, and I know you would enjoy it." Paul was sincerely delighted with the idea, and Amy cast an almost shy smile at Silas as she moved to the keyboard. The men sat quietly as Amy played, each one letting the music flow over him and basking in the sound of Amy's God-given talent. Grant's head lay on the back of his chair with his eyes closed, a slight smile on his lips. Paul studied the small hands that moved so effortlessly over the keys and produced such celestial sounds, making him think of the way music might sound in heaven. Silas's eyes never left Amy's face. He studied her lovely arched brows and the slight flush on her high cheekbones. His love found her flawless and lovely beyond compare. Amy was nearing the end of a beautiful old hymn when she allowed herself to look about the room. Paul had joined Grant in tipping his head back and closing his eyes, but Silas was watching her, his expression loving. Something inside of Amy began to open and grow, like a small flower beginning to bloom in the warm spring sun. "He's so wonderful and kind, and he loves me." The real truth of this fact hit Amy for the first time. The knowledge gave her such a warm, secure feeling that she felt tears sting her eyes. Silas was God's child, and she was God's child, and together they could have a wonderful life with his blessing and beneath his watchful care. Unbidden upon the heels of this miraculous thought surfaced the doubts. Could it really be that wonderful? Would he really love me for the rest of his life? Had Amy been able to tell Silas of her feelings and her fears, he would have answered all her questions and assured her of his love. But it was not to be on this night. With her father and Paul in the room, she knew there would be no time for talk. And when the evening came to an end, she had no choice but to head to bed with everything locked inside her. By morning, she knew she would have talked herself out of approaching Silas. "We haven't shared a bed for a long time. Do you snore?" "It wouldn't matter if I did, little brother. This is my bed. Keep that in mind." "I take it that means you intend to hog the covers." The men had just climbed into bed, and Silas tugged gently on the quilt in teasing. They lay quietly for a time, shifting once in a while for comfort, but neither one was close to sleep. Do you definitely have to leave tomorrow? Afraid so. I'm already later than I said I would be. How many people in your congregation? About 15, but the area has such potential, Silas. I just know God's going to use me up there. Paul's voice held all the enthusiasm he felt. I have no doubt he will, Paul, and you know I'll be praying. Thank you, Si. You know how much that means to me. Silence fell again. Silas? Yeah? Do you want to talk about Amy? How did you know? Grandma M and I talked. She didn't tell everyone, but we were discussing you, and she shared what you had told her. Do you want to tell me? I don't know, Paul. Amy is definitely my favorite subject, but sometimes I just can't see the point. She's just not interested in me. Are you sure of that, Silas? Are you sure she's not interested, but is possibly scared? Scared of what? Hasn't she been engaged before? Yes, she has. The guy broke it off with her earlier this year. Why did he break it off? Silas didn't answer. Was it another girl? I know what you're after, Paul, but she can't think that I would do that to her. It doesn't appear to me that you really know what she's thinking. You haven't talked to her. When did you become such an expert? Silas's voice was growing cross. I'm in love too. Silas said nothing for a long time, but questions were swarming through his head. He decided to pose his questions as Paul had done. Do you want to talk about her? Paul laughed. I'm not sure you should get me started. Does she love you? Yes. Paul's voice was apologetic, and Silas exploded. Paul, how could you think for 1 minute I wouldn't want your happiness? Following Silas's outburst, silence fell once again in the small attic room. Finally, Paul said, I'm not sorry she loves me, but it seems cruel to talk about my happiness when things are not settled between you and Amy. I appreciate your thoughts, Paul, but I think things are settled. I can't force her to love me, nor would I want to. I want her to come on her own accord, out of love, not pity or gratitude. Now, please tell me about Corinne. Please tell me about Corinne, where you met, everything. Paul's voice took on an almost dreamy quality as he spoke. Her full name is Corinne Maria Templeton. I met her up north. She and her family are members of the church I'll be pastoring. We've really had very little time together, but I guess it was love at first sight. I was staying with her aunt and uncle while I was speaking up there, and we met when she came to see them. We would have had more time together, but she wasn't feeling very well, and her dad insisted she go home. But it doesn't really matter. We had enough time to know how we feel about each other. So it's really serious. Is it ever? I want her for my wife. She loves God and is just as excited about the people and the work up there as I am. She's beautiful, too. Tall like Christine, only very slim and willowy. Her hair is even lighter than your Amy's, almost a white blonde. I've never seen it down, but her aunt told me it's very long. Paul's voice trailed off, and Silas was sure he was thinking of the woman he loved. Silas's thoughts were on the same track. Your Amy, Paul had said. Your Amy. He liked the sound of that. I can't give up, God, Silas prayed in his heart. I love her so much. If there's even the slightest chance of us having a life together, I can't give up. The brothers talked only a little while longer, a full day catching up with them. Tomorrow would bring goodbyes which, though never easy, a good night's sleep would certainly help.